Modern Alchemy, episode number 70. And we have a spotlight today, and we're incredibly excited and honored to have our guest here today.
Yes.
And
in our book, he's the superstar.
He's the superstar. Mr. Matt Osborne, he is the COO of Operation Underground Railroad. So if you've seen the movie, The Sound of Freedom, which we certainly have, Bearspa and I had not been to a movie theater in 3 years. We watched them at home, and so we said, hey,
this one took us there.
This is an exception. We not only paid it forward, but we said we need to get out and go to the theater to support the amazing work they're doing. Real quick about Matt, he's had a 12-year career with the CIA, which is pretty impressive. U.S. Department of State, he worked issues related to terrorism against homeland, illegal narcotics, organized crime, human trafficking, obviously, and formerly worked with former presidents. You can tell us which ones it slips me who they were, but I know you've worked with more than one.
Yeah.
Senior cabinet officials, National Security Council. With Operation Underground Railroad, Matt has led a total of 27 undercover rescue operations that resulted in the liberation of 211 human trafficking victims, which is just impressive, very impressive and honorable. And in the arrest of 72 suspected traffickers. So without further ado, let's just bring him on and let's all give a big welcome to Mr. Matt Osborne. Great to have you here, Matt.
Oh, thank you both so much. Great to be here.
So, Sound of Freedom, the big movie in America right now.
Yeah.
Here's my question. It was filmed in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, but it was not released until 2023. What's up with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think a lot of people didn't want to get out. This originally was done by 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox had wonderful studios set up in Bogota, Colombia, and Cartagena, and a few other places. I was able to be on set as a consultant there in 2018. The script was written in 2017. Well, Disney bought out 20th Century Fox, and for some reason, I'm sure we can speculate, shelved the movie, didn't want that out. And we shopped it around to different houses, everything from movie houses to Netflix to Amazon Prime. And people thought the subject matter is too dark. They didn't want the religious aspect, didn't want us to talk about God's children are not for sale, didn't want to talk about the Bible verses, quote Bible verses, didn't want us to pray. Well, then along comes Angel Studios, and we're just thinking it was a miracle of timing. After COVID hit, the country was ready for this, isn't it? And you mentioned the big movie hit of the summer. Isn't it crazy beating Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones, now kind of on the downward slope with Barbie and Oppenheimer? But that's okay. It's been an incredible run. I hope that people who haven't seen it get out to see it because it is powerful. And we're talking about such an important topic of child exploitation, human trafficking. And I'm just grateful to the two of you for giving this platform with your show, because this topic is so important and we have to discuss it.
Well, yes, we do. And we highly recommend the movie. And the thing is,
and we highly recommend that you bring Matt on your show as well.
Yeah. One of the reasons why we decided to go to the movie theater, well, we had a debate about it because since 2020, we've kind of laid low and we've found a rhythm of watching things at home. And Bearspa said initially, she said, I don't know if I want to watch this movie in a theater because it might be, what was the term you used?
Whoa.
Depressing, dark.
Well, no, I knew I would lose it at some point. So yeah. I mean, I can't think of anything darker that could be done, and you guys have seen it, and that just it's dark.
It is dark.
Go ahead.
But wouldn't you suggest, though, or agree to those in your audience who might be thinking, do I want to see it? Is it too dark? Should I bring my kids? Don't you agree, though, that it was actually done very tastefully, right? The scenes, what's happening, it's inferred, but you don't see anything. That was something we were really adamant about with the producer and director. Nothing graphic, nothing overly sexual, no nudity, nothing gratuitous, because we don't want an actual pedophile or trafficker to want to go see that movie, right, to get his
Right.
kicks. We want to do it tastefully. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. But then after you've seen the movie now, right, you think, hey, that was something that was pretty powerful and well done.
It was incredibly
Yeah.
well done.
No, I
And
would definitely recommend it, and I would say whoever who's experiencing what I experienced is get over it and go watch it.
yeah,
That's what I would say.
well, one of the things it sold us, I said, honey, we've got to support this. We've just got to
Yeah.
support it because you guys were having this big push to make it the number one movie, which you did.
Yeah.
And then I think we heard an interview with Jim, and he described exactly
Tim.
what you just said, that hey, it's not graphic, you don't see it,
Oh,
you
Tim.
know, which we were grateful to hear. And so that kind of convinced Beersheba, I think, that yeah, we can go to the movie theater and see this. And it's actually it at the end of the day, it's a movie of hope.
Yeah.
It's an uplifting type of thing to say, hey, there's something being done about this,
Hmm.
and it can be done, and it needs to be done more frequently and on a larger scale. Um, you may not want to answer this, and if you don't, then I'm totally good with that. But you said that you really don't know why Disney and Amazon and Paramount wouldn't produce the movie. Do you have any
Release the movie.
release the
Right?
movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any gut check as to why you think that is, given what's going on in the world today?
Yeah, I think when you look back even before COVID and Disney having the rights to the movie, it's just not really high on their radar. And this should not be a political issue. I think you both would agree, right? All political parties around the world, both political parties in the US, you agree that God's children are not for sale, right? And everyone says, "Oh yeah, I agree with that." And yet there's not the focus. And unfortunately, this movie has really become a political football on the left, on the right, getting criticized from each side. We've never said that the way the movie depicts human trafficking is the way that human trafficking is depicted around the world or in the United States. There are parts of it, and we can talk about it now on your show if you like, what we're seeing with Operation Underground Railroad. But I've been surprised and a little disheartened by the criticism, by those who are just flat out, oh, I'm not going to go see the movie because the founder of Operation Underground Railroad met with President Trump. Well, he said I would have run just as fast if Obama would have invited me, and I'd run just as fast if Biden would invite me. It's not a political issue. But I think to your question is that just, again, it's the religious, the undertones, never been popular in Hollywood, and yet you see what's happened in our country. Our country is ready for a movie that has clear right and wrong, clear good and evil, because that's what this is, this battle against child exploitation and human trafficking. So I think a lot of that came together of these reasons why, say, Disney or Netflix or Amazon Prime wouldn't want it. But we're grateful for Angel Studios. And again, as we look, we think it's God's timing. We have a bunch of different faiths represented in our organization, but we say we think this is God's timing. And I think it's borne out because this has truly been the summer blockbuster, and it's been completely unexpected.
Well, you're certainly on the same page as we are.
Mhm.
I as I view the world, I see the polarities are getting further apart between, let's call it, the dark and the light, if you will. There's been this driving force of a secular world for going. It started all the way back in the Renaissance, and it's been coming more and
Mhm.
more and more to the front, which secularism is a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a disbelief or a sarcasm about religion and God and all those kinds of things. And it's part of the humanistic movement, which says, hey, we're God.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of this, what I call a horizontal viewpoint that says this world is it. And yet there's a vertical viewpoint, if you will, that we've lost, and I believe we need to get back to, that says, hey, there is a God, and there are morals, and there are principles, and there are virtues, and we need to step back and see where we've
Mhm.
come.
Yeah.
And the issue you're dealing with, I agree with Beersheba. I can't fathom that it's any darker than that. And it's just amazing. And you mentioned Tim Ballard. Interestingly enough, as God would have it, if you will, Beersheba sent me a message to this morning as we were working in the offices, and she said, "You should look at my tweet." and I'm busy, and I said, okay. And so I went and looked at it, and it's Tim Ballard on his podcast talking about how you guys have lost a large amount of support and donorship.
1,000 donors.
Is it 1,000? Is that true?
Yeah.
Because
1,000 unique donors. You're right, Bersaba. Yeah, 1,000.
because he interviewed Trump.
That's sick.
This is not a partisan issue. This is a human issue.
That's seriously sick.
And so, my heart goes out to you for that, and my respect goes to Tim, because his I'm sure you've seen it, but on his podcast he said, look, basically this is about the kids. It's not about politics.
Right.
And you owe these kids an apology if you're backing on that. So so what more can you tell us about how this has become politicized? And I'll just throw this one in there too. I think it's well known by us and you as well, and probably a lot of our viewers, that a lot of legacy media has called this a conspiracy theory. The whole movie is a conspiracy theory. Talk a little bit about all that, if you will.
Yeah, no, great question. So just to break a few things down. So a few years ago, when President Trump was in the White House, again, as we say, tongue in cheek, our founder, Tim Ballard, had the audacity to accept a personal invitation from the President of the United States to come to the White House to sit down around a table with the chiefs of Homeland Security. I'm not sure if the FBI was there, other cabinet officials, National Security Council, to say, how do we fight human trafficking? How do we protect American children at home and abroad? Again, right, the joking, but the audacity to say, yes, Mr. President, I will come and we'll try to talk about this. I know I said this just a minute ago on your program, but Tim, it's true, because we always say it. If President Obama would have invited us, if President Biden would invite us today, we would run just as fast to sit down and say, Mr. President, let's fight this issue. But because Trump is controversial, we lost, and Bersaba, you mentioned, it was just over 1,000 unique donors, so 1,000 individuals who called up, emailed, texted the next day, I can't believe Tim met with that president. You take me off your roll. I'm not donating anymore. So I sit back in my cynical nature. Does that mean that you'd rather more children get abused, raped, let's just say it, than have someone sit down with a president who is, you don't like? And so to me, that was crazy. So James, talking about then your question of how this has become political. Again, there are true conspiracies out there. We don't subscribe to any of that. But we know that this actually happens. And so many people are saying it's a conspiracy to believe that children are really being sold. Well, you mentioned in my bio, on 27 different occasions, and those were only the successful ones that ended in rescues. I've been down many more times to try to find children. 27 different occasions, I have gone with a group of Americans, Westerners, this face, to tourist areas in our host countries, Mexico, Thailand, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Haiti. And not one time have I not been offered children. Does that make sense? You go, not one time has someone just come up and said, yeah, we don't do that. We don't do that here. So this exists every day. This movie gets that word out. Well, because of the Trump connection, because of the political side, because again, there are some out there who are saying that it's this big cabal, run by governments. I've never seen that. I don't subscribe to that. But what I know is that Americans, Westerners, Canadians, Europeans are the number one producer and consumer of child sex abuse material. That's unfortunately what we are as Americans. But these Westerners are sending sex tourists to tourist areas around the world who are being offered children, right? Who go there because they want to abuse children. Well, we're there to use a group of Americans and Australians, Canadians, and Europeans to try to turn this on its side. But unfortunately, this is just the latest front in the culture war. And I'm glad that we on your show can go above and beyond, get away from the politics and say, this really is happening. Now, how do we fight it?
$150 billion industry is what I've heard. Is that correct? And it's rapidly catching up with drugs. So
$150 billion is human trafficking writ large, commercial sexual exploitation, forced labor, organ harvesting, child sacrifice, just horrible things, aren't it, that humans do to other humans. But $150 billion, that's worldwide. Well, I heard a stat one time that with that money, you could buy every team in the National Basketball Association, every team in the National Hockey League, every Starbucks franchise around the world, and still have enough money to send every boy and girl in our country to 4 years of state college education. Now, I don't know the stat, true or not, but I know that this is the fastest growing criminal enterprise because, as you saw in Sound of Freedom, when Jim Caviezel, his character, says, how many times can you sell a bag of cocaine? One time. How many times can you sell a human? Over and over again? That's where I think you get to how lucrative this illegal enterprise is.
It's sobering. It's sad. It's frightening. It really is. How and here's the thing I'd like to clarify, and I think I understand. But prior to Operation Underground Railroad, you were looking at trafficking as part of the CIA. Is that correct?
So the CIA, the CIA wasn't as much focused on the human trafficking, but it was when my work with partnering with the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and U.S. Department of State. That's where, when I was in Madrid, Spain, about 17 years ago in 2006, that's where I first heard about this issue, this type of issue, and I could not believe, because my two daughters now are 21 and 18 years old. I don't know, you guys, how good the cameras are. You see this gray hair in my sideburns. I love my daughters, but that's a lot of the trouble they give me now, posting on social media and all these issues. But when I realized that this was happening to their age and younger, and they were younger at the time, I said, okay, I've got to do something to fight this. And that's when I first became aware of this. And so with the Department of State, some tours I did with them, not only in Spain, but in Venezuela and then Mexico City, I worked this account. Well, when Tim Ballard, who was my friend in graduate school from the year 2000, so imagine, at that point it had been about 10 years, 9 years since we graduated. He says, Matt, I'm going to leave the government and join and start an organization where we provide funding, training, tools, technology to domestic law enforcement and overseas. Will you help? Join. And I always say he was the brave one. He quit cold turkey when there was no money in the bank. He's got like 6 kids, or had 6 kids back then. He's adopted a couple more now. I just had the 2, and yet he was the brave one. He did it. I said, you tell me when this plane's up in the air. So a few months into it, he goes, we're going down the runway, about to take off. Come join. And it was a big leap of faith, but I'm glad I did it.
Wow.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's very courageous on both of your parts.
Mhm.
I just got to say, Matt, I didn't have any gray hair until I was married, and obviously you're married,
That's
so
not true.
you know how that works.
That's okay. That's okay.
It's okay. She likes it,
That's all
so
right.
we're good. A lot of women are traffickers, from what I've heard, and
Is
and
that true?
that's completely, well, correct me if that's not true, but it in my world model is completely contrary to traditional femininity. Any idea why this is happening?
It isn't that disgusting too. It's disgusting on both sides, but you look at someone, and I think of my wife, my mother, my daughters. I've been so blessed, but I've sat across the table from female traffickers who not only were just soulless, no light of Christ, no nothing in their eyes, but just talking about these women, these girls, as if they were products. I always say a bag of tomatoes, a sack of limes, it weighs this much, it costs this much, it'll do this much. And yet one of the most hideous experiences I ever had was in Acapulco, Mexico, sitting across the table from a woman who told us that she essentially was grooming, and I'll just say it on your show here, grooming virgins to sell their virginity for $7,500 each. This was back in 2014, 15. So think about the money there. And yet the reason that operation never came to fruition was because her daughter, 6-year-old daughter, the love of her life, ruptured an appendix and had to be in Mexico City in a hospital for a few weeks. So we couldn't do that operation. Sitting back and thinking, here's a woman who's grooming other people's daughters, other little girls, for this hideous commercial sex. And yet the apple of my eye, the jewel, the gem, my daughter. Does that make sense? Like, you see this, but we see a lot of times females are traffickers because no one will suspect them. Law enforcement doesn't go after them for the most part, but this absolutely does exist.
This might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but we talk about this and we have some strong opinions on this. The traditional family has degenerated. It really has. And
Mm.
traditional gender roles have degenerated. And, again, this might be not be something you talk a lot about, Matt, but do you have an opinion on how that is affecting or not some of these things?
Yeah, I've seen that now for 12 years, working this issue, actually a little more with the government, about 9 years with Operation Underground Railroad. And it's getting worse in a few different ways. The
Mm.
breakdown of the family, the epidemic of fatherless families, both in the United States and around the world. And again, this says nothing about the brave and wonderful single mothers who are doing amazing things. But
Yeah.
most of the studies show that women who are getting caught up, girls and women getting caught up into trafficking rings, are being lured in because they have certain vulnerabilities. That's certainly what's happening in the United States. Maybe it's a roof over their head. Maybe they need money. But oftentimes it's no father in the house, no role model. And so, to quote the country western song, they go looking for love in all the wrong places. They are
Hmm.
easily brought in by smooth talking men, women also, but men will say, well, I understand you. I get you. Let me give you the love you don't get at home. Well, after a day or two or a week or two of this, it's, hey, this now costs money. I've been putting you up in my house. You've been feeding you. Now you have to pay off the debt. And that's oftentimes what happens. Overseas, we see that as well. Socioeconomic conditions, poverty, other things that cause this. That is leaving a bunch of people vulnerable to trafficking. So we try to fight this, obviously, by the rescue and the rehabilitation. We can talk about our aftercare program. We know that's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is, for the most part, and James, I know you'll agree too, that we've got to get men to really rally that these are women, these are daughters of God, these are not products to be purchased. And I use myself as an example. When I was in my late teens, 18, 19, into my 20s, I'm a little embarrassed to say I went to bachelor parties. I went to a couple strip clubs. I thought that this was, they just wanted my money. Now that I see what happens that drives a girl into the sex trade, I'm ashamed by that. Well, I can't change the past, but now I can focus on the future. And so we try to partner with good groups who are on the front end preventing. And the first thing is just, again, with the guys, trying to let them know this is trafficking. It's not prostitution. These are victims out there. They're not volunteers. I think that's a misconception that we all need to work to break.
I think
Yeah.
that's a really poignant point, and I do firmly agree with you that traditional masculinity and femininity need to have their place, and we need to understand
Yeah.
there's no competition. There's we're equal yet different, and
Right.
that's what I think has been kind of forgotten. And there's been this, again, I won't get into history. We all know how things started breaking down primarily in the early 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and with the shift of the women's movement from voting rights to working rights and all these other kinds of things. Let me shift gears for a minute, if I may. How are our current open borders under this administration affecting the trafficking?
So first and foremost, I want to say that is not the prime driver of trafficking in the United States, and yet it's getting worse every day. And let me explain. If you look at the vast majority of human trafficking victims in the United States, they are American citizens, girls and women mostly, also boys and men, who again have been lured into rings based on what I said just a little while ago. Vulnerabilities, a local tough guy, a pimp who's exploiting girls and through force, fraud, or coercion, keeping them into the sex trade. However, now when you have basically open borders and you have kids who are being brought in, there is a demand, and a growing demand likely, for younger kids, for foreigners, if you will. And this is a real tragedy in so many ways. I worked this a little bit with the government in Mexico City before I resigned to join Operation Underground Railroad. That was in 2014, when you remember the UAMs, the unaccompanied minors, or UACs, unaccompanied children. They started showing up on the border and pretty much have not stopped since then. And I say the real tragedy is that those kids who show up on our borders, they're the lucky ones, aren't they, in a lot of ways, because we know where they are. Think about all the kids who didn't make it. They either were killed, brought into trafficking rings, exploited through Central America and through Mexico. And so even though we don't advocate oftentimes for policies, try not to get too much involved in politics, it is absolutely, I know both of you would agree, our immigration, our asylum policies need to be changed. We need to start adjudicating these asylum claims in the host countries themselves. If there's a legitimate reason you need to come to the U.S., let's absolutely facilitate that. But no, none of this whole, hey, welcome sign. Let's put out the welcome mat and welcome sign for everyone to come, because some of our law enforcement partners, both on West Coast and East Coast, but also in Middle America, are seeing an increase in women in massage parlors, in nail salons, in strip clubs from Venezuela, Mexico, Central America, and even from the Middle East, even from Ukraine now. We're starting to see this because of this movement of population.
Oh wow.
Well,
Wow.
obviously, I'm married to an amazing legal immigrant.
Yep.
Who
did it the hard way.
who went through the entire process, and
and it's a process to go through. Yeah, it's a fair process to go through.
And isn't that sad? I'm sure that people on our side of the aisle in politics, we're always criticized as being anti-immigrant. Well, look at you sitting next to, we're not anti-immigrant, we're anti-illegal immigration. We're pro-legal immigration.
Yes,
thank you.
I think we should welcome immigration. I just think we need to protect our country. We need to protect all the immigrants. We need to do it right, and because it gives them an opportunity. Certainly, that Beersheba can speak to.
And I think the legal immigrants that are here would say the same thing that I would say. They would stand for the same things, because we know the difference between living in America and, for example, in the Middle East.
And you're grateful.
And I'm super grateful.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Beersheba, I will throw out too, and again, you have more experience than I do, and your bravery and your family coming from that area. At Operation Underground Railroad, we are working in Jordan a little bit. We're having some success. We've got an office based in Dubai, but it faces mostly towards Africa where we work. We've had a really tough time getting into some Middle Eastern countries because, and again, I'm not slandering the whole, it's just stereotypes, but governments are sort of keeping us out, saying trafficking doesn't exist here. Well, trafficking exists everywhere in exploitation. But as you look more into it, sometimes it's the royal families who are involved. Sometimes it's governments who are complicit. And again, we're getting really kept out. And it's too bad, because over there we're seeing and we're hearing anecdotally that boys are being exploited maybe as much, if not more, than girls.
Oh, wow. I believe that. 100% believe that. 100%. And I'm not surprised that they won't let you in. Not at all.
Yeah, we saw Tim on Jordan Peterson's podcast.
That was a great podcast.
Yeah,
it was a great podcast, and some of the descriptors he used about how these tiny babies and literally breaking their bodies, which is just how do you? I don't know. I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you've seen some pretty horrendous things. How do you deal with those, Matt?
So I will first say that fortunately, I have not had to see the worst of the worst. That was Tim Ballard during his career. He had to see that. And that's where we salute the brave men and women of Homeland Security investigations. And as you know, too, how sad that Border Patrol and Customs and Immigration are being criticized, just trying to protect our country on the border. Well, we see firsthand that Homeland Security investigations, they are going after the worst of the worst. The true pedophiles, those who are peddling in what we used to call child pornography. Now we call it child sex abuse material. We, for the most part, do not have to see that. And I got to be careful, because we do have a couple people on our team. These are our brave men. They're 3 men in this case, who are our digital forensics investigators and open source experts. One is in Southeast Asia. One is in Florida, who's kind of overseeing, and one is in Central America. They do, James, have to see a lot of these type of, and again, we're just going to say it, right? I think you mostly have adults in your audience, child rape videos. And I remember Tim, and again, maybe you heard it on Jordan's show or others, when he was in his government career. And that's why the Jim Caviezel character, for those of you who've seen the movie, if you haven't, everybody, please do go see it. You won't regret it. Do you remember when he's looking at the videos? And again, you don't see what it is. It's tastefully done, but you kind of see what he's seeing, and he's crying. That's what Tim would say. Tim would say, you'd have to watch this awful stuff, and you'd have to be looking for clues. Is there something in the background? Can you tell what hotel they're in? Is there some sort of language, spoken or something? I'm fortunate I've never had to see that. But what we do have to see is when we go undercover into these brothels around the world working with law enforcement, they oftentimes have hardcore pornography playing on screens around everywhere in the brothel. That's to desensitize these girls and these boys to be seeing
Wow.
this all the time. And so what we tell our operators is, you don't want that crap to get into your head. So you see it real quick. You take note of what's going on so later you can write in your report. But you focus on the children. You focus on the traffickers. Because if you start looking at that, that's going to mess with your heads. And that's why we have therapists. I know the government has therapists and others. But again, one more thing, and then I'll stop, is the kid. You remember in the movie where the Tim Ballard character, Jim Caviezel, at the very beginning with Chris, the other Homeland Security investigations officer, who says, I don't think I can do this anymore. When I lay down at night, all I see are those kids' faces. We've seen that a lot with our operators and government officials, and that's why you have to work to undo that damage, because that gets in your head, and it's some of the worst things you'd ever have to see.
I can
Yeah.
only imagine, and probably can't really imagine, but
No.
I would not be surprised at all if many have a hard time sleeping at night. I think I probably would. Um, let's shift gears a little bit too, because you said a lot of this is happening in the U.S. It's not just coming in from outside the borders, but also in the U.S. I
Mm-hmm.
know in the movie there's variety of scenes, and they're a little grainy. They appear to be in South America, maybe, or Central America, where there's a lot of snatch and grab, for lack of a better term. I almost hate using that term because it sounds like it's making a thing out of a human being, but they just run up and kids are playing and they grab them and put them on a motorcycle or in a car. Is that happening here in the U.S. too? Because those scenes seem to be from
Yeah.
other countries.
Right. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up for a couple reasons. So first, to answer the question, those are from the CCTV footages in different places, Asia, a lot of areas, and then Latin America. I think that was good to kind of increase the power, the pathos of the movie. It draws you in. But I will say that I actually, and I love the producer and the director, so if they're listening, it's nothing bad. I actually argued to take that out because I don't want people to think that that's how a majority of trafficking happens. A majority of trafficking happens, and I'll use the U.S. 1 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon when a kid should be in school, and yet these groomers go to a Walmart, a movie theater, a mall, a bus station. Who's out of place? Oh, that girl looks like she's 13 years old. Why is she not in school? That girl looks like she's 16. Let me talk to her. Little by little, insidious grooming, as we call it. Hey, do you need some money for a McDonald's hamburger? Hey, do you need a bus fare? Hey, do you want to come live with me? Let me take you get some dinner. Let me help you. Little by little, that's how they're lured in. So obviously that type of kidnapping that we saw in the video, yes, that happens, but the vast, vast, vast majority of cases are, again, more of this grooming, luring people in. And these traffickers are willing to spend weeks, months, even a year or more to try to bring in someone to their ring. Because again, if they can get someone in, get a little bit of compromising material on them, they can sell them over and over again, multiple times a day. Think about how lucrative that is. So think about how much they're willing to invest in getting someone into their trafficking ring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow.
that were you gonna say
No.
something? No,
No, I got nothing on that.
you're digesting it.
Yeah.
So let's transit it. So the grabbing isn't happening as much as we saw in the film,
Right.
which is nice to know.
Well, they showed
But
the grooming part of the movie too.
Correct.
the
The
attractive,
model agency. Yeah.
saying, hey, you could be a model,
Yeah.
and I could see how people, particularly in social media culture, could fall for that quite easily. Parents and children,
Yeah.
Huge problem. Social media is a
So
huge problem.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's got to be a huge problem, right? In regards
And
to the.
and think about, I made the joke earlier about the gray hair because of my daughters, but again, they are very well educated. They've had a dad who was CIA and now Operation Underground Railroad, and yet the things they still put out on social media, pictures of them and their friends with their bikinis on in a swimming pool, or putting out, hey, I'm in Florida this weekend, looking for stuff to do. Well, it's that kind of stuff that groomers are out there looking for. And nowadays, with the anonymity, what I always tell them is, if you're accepting a friend request from 18-year-old boy, or that's what his profile says, and it has a picture like Zac Efron, right, the actor. Unless you know who that is in person, you'll never know whether you're talking to an 18-year-old boy or a 65-year-old man. So those in your audience who are parents and grandparents, please know what apps your kids are using on their cell phones. Have the conversation with them that there are groomers out there. There are people who want to do them harm. If an offer seems to be too good to be true, I can make you a model. Come with me to Paris, to London. It probably is too good to be true. And I don't have any sons. I have nephews who play video games with other strangers, with other people.
Yeah.
I always say, go ahead and play the game. Have fun. Do not talk about anything in the game don't talk about anything with a stranger that's not related to something in the game. You can talk about the games all you want. Don't share any personal information, because I tell you, this is how people are lured into these networks to try to get compromising information, a photo, a post, something. Then they have blackmail material, and then they're able to exploit them through force, fraud, or coercion.
Well,
Yeah.
you kind of answered my next question, which means you're ahead of me, and I like that. Um, is there anything else? Because my question was, what should parents do to protect their children, which you've answered. Are there any other things that you would recommend as a parent yourself, or just as a COO of Operation Underground Railroad, to help protect the kids if you're a
I would
parent?
say, yeah, exactly. And I would say parents and grandparents, caregivers, father figures, right? Foster parents, anybody who has some sort of caregiving role. You will know your child better than I do. You'll know whether you need to scare them and freak them out, whether you need to treat them with kid gloves and go a little more cautiously. But let them know they always need to be aware. They need to be careful. They need to. So again, we talked about social media, but when you're out and about at a movie, a mall, a concert, have your antenna out, not just for standard pickpockets, robberies, sexual assaults, things like this, but for people who are maybe going to try to slip something to you in a drink, right? So that maybe you're incapacitated. Maybe someone's going to try to give you a ride home or get you into their car. Just be very careful. And if the hair starts standing up on the back of your head, if you get a gut feeling, listen to that. Don't ignore it. And that's one thing we're always talking about, is this situational awareness. That can be, again, out and about in your physical daily lives or online. And again, I'll say, if something seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. This isn't a reason to freak out and be in a fetal position, never go outside and not enjoy life. It's just to be safe when you go outside and have a healthy degree of situational awareness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good. And as a viewer, please take notes on that, and please watch it again and take notes again, because
Yes.
I think that's those kinds of action items are imperative to help prevent this.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier, and this is fascinating, not fascinating, it's frightening, is that you go into these brothels and they're blasting porn
Oh, yeah.
all around. Well, as we all know, porn is one of the biggest industries on the internet right now. And unfortunately, a lot of young kids are watching that and
Yeah.
getting into that. And my personal opinion, and you said it, that it desensitizes, it's meant to desensitize the viewer to things that we shouldn't be desensitized to.
I didn't
Right.
think about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's profound,
Yeah,
isn't
it
it?
is
And
profound.
it's kind of like, if you look at Hollywood movies, they're so graphic now.
Right.
You used to, in the old movies, you could see someone shooting someone and it didn't show it, and now they're showing all kinds of blood and gore, and it's a desensitization to these types of things. And so, um,
Yeah.
do you? And I know I'm asking you to give your own theories, but I'd love to hear. I have my own. Do you think all those things are feeding into this sexualizing of children, because we become so desensitized to just normal, holistic, moral, sexual interaction from a very early age, and now it's like you got to get a bigger dopamine hit.
Yep.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's actually not theory. It's actually what I've seen. You talk about the operations I've been fortunate to lead that have resulted in rescues, but also they've resulted in arrests. And to the extent we've had opportunities to either interview the alleged, some of them have, had their day in court. So we'll say traffickers, perpetrators, or hear from law enforcement about those interviews. Almost every single man who winds up arrested for either trafficking or trying to purchase did have a pornography addiction. And they talk about the whole slippery slope. They don't know what they're doing as they're talking about it. But James, it's exactly what you just said. Well, it started with a Playboy magazine, and I was looking at the pictures and reading the articles. And after a while, again, they didn't use what you just said, but it's true. The dopamine hit. They're like, that wasn't enough for me. That didn't give me the rush. That didn't excite me. So then it had to be a video, and then it had to be violent or a child or a fetish. And so this absolutely is the number one reason we have such a huge trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation problem today is the ready availability of hardcore pornography. When I go speak to groups and when I try to educate, I'll use myself as an example, and it doesn't make me look good, but it's the truth. When I was in my teens and 20s, or I guess I'd say my teens, if I wanted to look at pornography, I had to work for it. You had to go looking through a father's or uncle's drawer to see if he had Playboys, or go get someone who's over the age of 21 to go to 7-Eleven, and that magazine that was wrapped up in the corner where all you saw is Playboy, it is today on the cell phones. It's today on laptops. And not only that, and I love when you talk about desensitizing, is my grandfather, who passed a number of years ago. I live in Dallas, so we were watching a Dallas Cowboys football game one Sunday afternoon, and a Miller Lite beer commercial came on, and they had a girl, with a top cut down to there and a skirt hiked up to there, and she was selling beer, right? She was dancing in the commercial. My grandfather said something I'll never forget. He said, "Matt, that would have been considered pornography when I was your age." Just like you talk about the murders, that never would have been seen on TV, the gore. The sexualization stuff that's on would never have been, the billboards. And I'm not some, fuddy-duddy moralist, but I'm a realist. The more that our kids and young men are seeing that, little by little by little, it gets to the point where it's not enough to look at pornography anymore. You have to act on it. You have to be what's called a contact offender. That means you have to go and abuse another human being. That's how we get these arrests. That's how we get people who are purchasing other human beings because of this addiction to pornography. And that's my view.
Oh, it's a sound view. I was not aware that if I heard you correctly, it's no longer a crime to view child pornography on the internet. Because
no, it is. It is. It's just the rampant nature that after a while, someone who's looking at two adults having sex on a video, that's not enough. It's got to be violent. It's got to be a fetish. It's got to be children. That's what then drives them into the illegal behavior. And this is something I know you'd agree too, is our government needs to do a much better job going after the big technology. There can be a force for good. They can be a force for bad in a lot of ways. So many of the cases we help law enforcement work start on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and all these other, there needs to do a better job policing these apps to try to protect children online.
Yeah, agreed.
Totally agree. And I think it was just yesterday or day before I saw there are many states, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Matt, that are passing laws to downgrade the prosecution of child having sex with children, which just boggles my mind.
How about our Supreme Court justice, the most recent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson? Do you remember the hearings that came out that she was going quite lightly on some of these child predators? Now, she said not, but it was this whole idea. So it gets to the highest court in the land. And again, not slandering any of our Supreme Court justices, but this is an idea, I think, and this is now opinion, I think it's, again, this idea of either it is not as bad as it seems, or, you know what, these are just people who have a different proclivity, a different desire. And one thing, and I don't know how deep you want to get in this on your show, but I'm sure you've heard that now you no longer can call them pedophiles. You have to call them minor attracted persons, MAPs. That's just another way of just changing the rules, fudging the lines a little bit. And that, to me, I really worry about 10 years from now. Because if someone 10 years ago, James and Bersaba, if someone 10 years ago in 2013 would have predicted everything that was going on today in our schools, the gender stuff, the fudging, this and that, we would have been called crazy back then, right? Boom, look where we are. Can you imagine right now if we could predict 10 years from now, someone would call us crazy? I don't think we're going to be crazy 10 years from now.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, let's pray that we would be. But you know,
Well,
I mean, because something it's coming to a head. I believe personally that God has a plan,
yes.
and I reside in that,
Yeah.
and I believe that we have to have faith, and that doesn't mean we sit back and go, "Oh, I've got faith. I'm not going to do anything." No, it means you have faith that everything is unfolding in perfect order, and it's going. You know, there has to be a breakdown before there's a breakthrough. That's just a reality of life, whether it's on a personal level or on a universal level. And
Right.
so, there's so many things we could talk to you
I
about
know.
here, Matt, because this
Well,
is.
there's one thing I think it's important. Something that I've thought about a lot is I work with people that unfortunately have experienced sexual abuse more than not, and I know the trauma that is caused and the ripple effect it has in their life as
Mm,
they become adults. So I wonder with these kids now, what they experience is, it's beyond my imagination and it's horrific. So I can't even imagine what these kids grow up to be. So I know you guys said you have a recovery program. What does
Yep.
that
Yep.
entail, or what's the percentage of these individuals having a chance at somewhat, let's say, a normal life, if that even exists for them?
Yeah, excellent question, Bersaba. And again, you talked about it too, right? It's that trauma. And I know many in your audience have probably experienced this type of trauma, but I think all of us have experienced some trauma. So I'll just use
Mhm.
like a car accident or almost being a car accident, slamming on brakes. Think about how much that affects you. Think about if you had to be with some disgusting, gross, violent man 6 men a day, 8 men a day, 10 men a day, 12 men a day. Think about that type of trauma. How do you then undo that trauma? So that's where our aftercare department comes in. We always say, and I'm sure you heard Tim talk about it on Jordan's podcast, there's no rescue without the recovery, no rescue without the aftercare. Well, we're very transparent. In our first couple of years, 2014, 15, we thought the countries themselves could take care of their aftercare. Well, they couldn't. So that's why we stopped operations. We hired a director for aftercare. We now said we're going to go through the back end first. We're going to make sure they have enough beds, make sure they have enough quality care so that when we rescue, we can get the kids or the adults, 18, 20-year-old girls or more, get them back with their families, or in the case of if they're an orphan or their own mother sold them into this, or for some reason the family situation is not conducive to them going home, we have vetted aftercare homes, resource centers to try to undo that trauma. Right now, James, I think you'd ask numbers, is about 1/3 of those who we've helped rescue cannot go home. So fortunately, 2/3 can, but 1/3 can't go home. We interview families. Excuse me. We interview families, and if we think that everything's okay, we go back. Sometimes though, we're like, something's not right here. I think you knew about this, or it's not working out.
Well,
We offer, and that's why our donors and donations are so vital, because we want to be able to take a child or an adult victim of trafficking to help undo that trauma, to help them have, and you mentioned, Bersaba, a normal life. Some people say, oh, you give them a second chance at life. Some of these girls never had a first chance, right?
right.
You
yeah.
think about what happened to them when they were younger. And we've had success stories now, as we say, of moving victims to survivors and survivors to thrivers. Children who now have successful jobs. For the Sound of Freedom operation, so that, and it's very, very, was very realistic, that beach operation. That beach operation netted a bunch of survivors. Well, 2 of them have chosen to stay with our program now since 2014. That was when the operation happened. They're now 2 ambassadors for Operation Underground Rail. We pay them for their businesses. We pay them to go and advise and warn others in that area about human trafficking. So that's what we try to do. It's not always a success story. It's not always a happy ending. Think about if your own mother sold you into this, what trauma would be in your head. But what we want to do is knit that that hammock, if you will, as tightly as possible so people aren't falling through. Knit that net as tight as possible. Not always happy stories, but we really have had a lot of successes, and that's what we try to focus on.
That's
Oh,
that's really great.
yeah,
You know, the follow up is imperative, and the follow through, obviously.
for sure.
Um, so, kudos to you. How can we? Bersabeh and I go to Whole Foods to do our grocery shopping. We go to certain different places around town, as most people do. How do we look? What kind of signs can we look for to say, hey, something's maybe not quite right here?
Hmm.
If we
Yeah.
see a child with an adult or something of that nature.
Yeah, what we always say is the eyes don't see what the mind doesn't know. So now we're talking about this on your show. Now your viewers and listeners will know and have their antenna up. And that, in a lot of ways, is going to be one of the secrets to, I think, to trying to battle this and solve this, is trying to get us all with our antenna up. We always say never take matters into your own hands. You're not law enforcement. Please don't do that. But if you see something truly you think it's a big issue, call 911. If you think it's something related to trafficking that maybe isn't an emergency, the National Anti-Human Trafficking Hotline is 373-7888. So 888-373-7888. That goes to Washington, D.C., the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that then farms those calls out. They would rather you say something and it turns out to be nothing than if you don't say something. So what to look for? Just things that kind of make your, like I said, the hair stand up in the back of your head, a gut feeling. That man doesn't really look like he goes with that child, or that child doesn't look like she wants to be there. He wants to be there. Or maybe I saw the child in a store aisle and I asked him something innocuous and someone butted in right away. Or maybe there's, they look like they've been crying or been sort of, been beaten up and abused. Maybe they have a tattoo on their neck. That's what we saw in the movie, a crown tattoo, money sign, dollar sign, things like that. We're also educating service providers who are likely to see human trafficking victims and maybe not know it. Flight attendants, hotel desk receptionists, others like that, store clerks you talk about. So I don't know if that answers your question, but again, it's just kind of keeping your antenna up and knowing who to call if you do think that there's something wrong. And again, please call. Rather there be nothing than you say, I'm just my imagination, go on about your day, and you missed a chance to maybe save a child.
We'll
Yeah,
put
for
that
sure.
number
Yeah, I'll put that
down
number up.
below,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
you as a
Yep.
viewer can grab that number and have it. So, wow, this has been great. This podcast is called Modern Alchemy, and I don't know um, what you know about alchemy, but alchemy is really the art and science of transmutation. It's about taking something that of low value and transmuting it into something of high
High
value,
value.
taking
Yeah.
something that is potentially heinous and transmuting it into something that is beautiful. And obviously that's what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
The final question we always ask our guests is, can you tell us about a situation in your life personally, Matt, that has been really challenging, really difficult, and yet you were able to transmute it into something where you learned a lot, you grew a lot, you became a better person?
Yeah, just off the top of my head was, after a 12-year career with the CIA, U.S. Department of State, being an intelligence officer, diplomat, overseas, being with some unsavory characters, right, and being in some difficult situations. My wife was right. We've been married now 25 years, so this was about 10 years ago, but she said, this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. You're going to have to sit across the table from human beings who are trading and selling other human beings just so casually. And I said, no, the CIA taught us these mind tricks to go to a special place and you can stay and roll. She was right. The first time, and it was the Sound of Freedom operation. So I was on that operation. The real bad guy's name was Edward, but if you remember the model, Giselle, Cati Juarez, her name was Kelly Joanna Suarez. I was sitting around the table from them, and they were saying essentially, you can be as tough as you want with these kids and do whatever you want, but also have a little delicacy because it's the first time we've been grooming them. And I wanted to throw up. I wanted to come across the table and strangle them. I wanted to just give up on life and say, I'm done. God, take me now. I mean, humanity, this is its lowest. But I just stayed in role. I said, you got to stay in character. And we said, okay, well, these girls better be virgins when we rescue them. We didn't say rescue, but by the time we're with them, they better be virgins when we want to try it out. Meaning, you better protect them. Sure enough, they were when we rescued. And now to see what that has turned into. What is the lowest and despicable, human beings in these negotiations. In these times, I've also seen some of the most light, because I know that God is not neutral in this fight, that God knows. He has every hair on our head numbered, as you know from the Bible. But the fact that he could end this with a word, but for some reason, because he's given us all free agency, but we know in the end what is going to be waiting for these traffickers. And that's why I love Jim Caviezel quoting one of the Gospels. Better for him that a millstone be put around his neck and he be cast in the deepest ocean than for him to, cause one of these children to sin. And that's what's happening. So I don't know if that's exactly your question, but it's taking the darkest moments and finding light. And that's what Tim always talks about. Find light in the darkness. That's what Operation Underground Railroad does. I'd invite your listeners and viewers to visit us at ourrescue.org, ourrescue.org, and see and learn more of these stories of how we're finding light in the darkness.
For sure.
Well, you answered my final great answer, by the way, and spot on. I was going to ask how the viewers can get in touch with you and learn more about your work and support in any way possible, and I think you've already answered that. You want to repeat that again, and we'll put it down below as well.
Yeah, for sure. And we love the Sound of Freedom. We love what Angel Studios is doing. We get no proceeds, nothing from any of the tickets. We've been benefiting from people coming to our website, ourrescue.org, ourrescue.org. And we are doing operations every day almost around the world. Come learn about the men and women who are currently doing it. And thanks for your support. And thanks to the two of you. This is not an easy topic, but I hope you agree. There is light. There is hope. We have faith. And we're always going to do something. We have an audacious goal. We're going to end human trafficking. It may not happen in my lifetime. I'm going to give every day that I have that God's given me. I'm going to try to do what I can for this.
That's awesome.
Well, God bless you, and lots of respect and love to you. And keep doing great work, you and your team. Hopefully we'll stand to it.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.